All right, so while people are coming in, maybe I will kick us off. So welcome again to the 30-minute CMR Journal Club. I'm Nicole Cyberlick. I'm from the University of Michigan, and Matthias Friedrich is also with us, who does the Journal Club on alternate months. So today we are focusing on two papers that have a more technical bent. And these are papers that are looking at how we can optimize acquisition in order to make our acquisitions more flexible and responsive to either physiological motion or looking at potentially interventions. This is going away from the idea that we just collect our data, irrespective of what exactly the patient or the heart is doing. But instead, we really try to tailor our acquisition and then our reconstruction, of course, to match what is going on with the particular examination that we're trying to do. So I'm really excited that we have two great speakers with us today. So we're going to start with a paper by Dr. Francesco Contijoch, and then we're going to move to a paper presented by Dr. Vivek Mutharangu. And let's kick it off with Dr. Contijoch. So his paper is entitled Closed Loop Control of Case-Based Sampling via Physiological Feedback for Cine MRI. So I'm going to hand it off to Francisco. Go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Good morning. I guess I'm in San Diego, so it's the start of our day here. Hopefully people can see the slides. So I just took some screenshots because there's a movie that I wanted to show. But this is actually a really cross-disciplinary effort, and it actually took, I think the biggest hurdle in terms of doing this was the actual deployment on the scanner and on the sequence, which I think is hopefully getting better nowadays with things like Gadgetron and Fire. So I'll try to touch on those points when I get there. The main kind of motivation of this was we had done earlier work using golden angle acquisitions, for example, in people with arrhythmias, and then we would resort all the data based on what their ECG told us, and realize that the data loses the nice sampling properties of the golden angle when you start mixing and matching golden angles. And so basically the question here was, can we somehow adapt in real time what angles we're acquiring to keep the sampling as uniform as possible as we go? So you have to make decisions very quickly. You're in SSFPs, you're talking about TRs in the 2 to 3 millisecond range. So you don't have a lot of time to kind of crunch the numbers and figure out what to acquire next. And we wanted to do it in a way that it was adaptive to the patients. People have all sorts of different ECG patterns, and detecting QRS complexes and things like that can be a bit slow. Right, so basically here, pulling from the introduction, segmented golden trajectories can be suboptimal in terms of their uniformity, because once you start having gaps or taking subsegments of them, you're not guaranteed to have any of the uniform properties. And so we wanted to do this on the fly in a closed loop, meaning the system kind of controls itself. Basically what we designed in 2D was an algorithm that would first look at the ECG in the past and find areas that were similar using the cross correlation. And then it would look at the case-based samples that were acquired at those points and then try to minimize the largest gap. So that's a fairly straightforward kind of tool. Wherever the largest gap is in angles, you can put a sample right in between it and continuously try to break any of the large gaps into smaller ones. And so the cross correlation is great because it's really fast. And so here I'll show kind of a schematic on the left. You have the current position where your sampling is shown in green. And so you're trying to figure out where is that case-based sample going to be in a radial acquisition. You obviously have the most recent couple samples in yellow. That would be the typical single shot mode. But then here we've identified 1, 2, 3, 4 prior beats that have a similar phase. And we've gathered those samples into the kind of a case-based trajectory here shown in the bottom. And the green now is splitting the largest gap. And so basically the aspect of this on the right shows kind of the closed loop design is you have to have a log of what you've scanned, when you've scanned it, and kind of keep continuously querying it as you go. And so there's kind of buffers that we had to define. We're going to look, let's say, in the last 10 seconds, and we're going to try to find something like 5 or 6 shots. So then Here, just another example, the cross correlation here is what's shown on the top right, and this is how we did this. So we had, it's something like an autocorrelation where you have the signal itself with just zeros kind of filling most of it, and then it's matched to its own pattern. So it's, each patient has their own signature, and so we don't have to worry about different ECG patterns. And so we can basically find any of the peaks in the past, and these would be periods where the ECG matches. And that's how we defined our shots. And so this is kind of the movie I wanted to show. So at the beginning, without the adaptive aspect, we just started the algorithm with golden angles. And so here, the algorithm is at this point in ECG, it's looking in the past and identifying these prior shots that it wants to use. And then here's a nice example of it not being very well uniformly distributed. But the algorithm now kind of takes control and is putting the red line is what it's deciding to acquire. So it's picking the largest gap. And if you kind of play this, the movie will start beating on the right. But you can see that as those initial angles wash out, you end up with a much more uniform K-space. And so the image quality gets better. If I kind of show this, this is kind of all happening in real time. So every time you go to acquire a new sample, you match new data, you get a new data set. And there are times when there's gaps that kind of led to some measures of uniformity and stuff that we had to develop. Basically, the standard deviation of these angles is kind of what we looked at. But you can see on the top right, which is an overlay of the ECG, that it nicely finds the peaks. So that was really reassuring. And then here is just another movie where on the left-hand side, we have the single shot, kind of low, highly undersampled movie. On the right-hand side, it's the same amount of data, but in a single shot mode. So it's kind of blurry and smooth motion. And in the middle is the arcs kind of showing a best of both worlds. So you have more data without really a longer footprint. These are just some still frames, kind of, again, this is from the paper, so I kind of came back to that. You can see the contractile motion of the heart on the right, as well as the distributions and kind of the nice boundary definition. So this was still also being done under a breath hold. So that's another aspect that we didn't handle here. But one question is whether you can also do respiratory binning in a similar fashion would be kind of a nice extension of this, and doing this in 3D as well. I'll skip these. I just pulled them in case anybody had any questions. And then maybe the last kind of thing we showed was what I was mentioning earlier. We came at this from an arrhythmic perspective. And so if you're trying to now gate the scan or somehow sort this data, you might miss QRS beats or complexes. You might detect extra ones. And so the cross correlation does a really nice job here of detecting the same point in this very complicated ECG, such that you could do something like multi-shot imaging. That depends on the person's arrhythmia. If it's frequent enough and it's a stable pattern, this was kind of what we were showing. And so you could actually think about getting not just single shot data, but multi-shot data in real time. So we think that has applications for interventions and as well as other kind of just diagnostic uses. Right, so the main, one of the key challenges here is we actually did this on the scanner. So we had the sequence kind of waiting for an angle from another computer that was crunching the numbers, and that was a lot of asynchronous programming to figure out. And really, I don't recommend it, essentially, if you can avoid it. So things like packages like Gadgetron that allow you to kind of do those connections, I think are really useful. And then right here, we don't know these views in advance. So if you do a typical golden angle, you can write them down as a list or any sort of other trajectory. Here, we had no idea what the angles it was going to play out. It actually makes a really interesting noise when the scanner starts playing, because you lose any sort of nice periodic nature, and it sounds like the machine is kind of grinding to a halt. But that's actually kind of what, and so obviously maybe governing that with other metrics, like how do you reduce eddy currents, or kind of trying to keep the smallest angle, could be another metric to optimize. But I'll stop there, and maybe we can kind of get to this in Q&A. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for presenting this really, really interesting paper. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. You can also raise your hand, or if you're bold, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question of Francisco. I think that would be totally fine. But maybe I will kick this off. So, I think that it seems like magical to me that you are able to in real time update the system to tell it exactly what, yes, this is the question I have. Like, how did you make that happen? Like, what was actually the implementation of saying, please go in and collect this next angle? Like, how did that operate with, the pulse sequence program? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, so I think if I actually explain this kind of, maybe it's easier to start on the right. I think that's where we kind of all we write our pull sequence, right? And it's going to do some RF event that, let's say, it takes 3 milliseconds. The first thing to kind of do is you have to be able to insert some sort of wake up so that it doesn't just populate these views, and it has all the instructions ready. So basically we had to learn, which was how long, before the next event block do you need to wake up. So this would be maybe hopefully as low as possible, but say it's 2 milliseconds. So here, you're doing a TR of 3 milliseconds, so 2 milliseconds before the end of that TR, you ask, the sequence sends a wake up command to the pull sequence controller. And that says to this other computer, hey, what angle should I play out? And so there's either an angle sitting there waiting for it, or it's calculated on the fly. And we had to kind of play around with those parameters. And then it would send it back. And so here, the pull sequence controller, maybe it waits half a millisecond. If it doesn't have an angle, it plays the next golden. Or else you get into these, I think what you might imagine is either these loops where you run out of instructions, or any kind of lag in the system fails. It does present a limitation for how complicated this calculation can be. How many seconds in the past can you look? The cross correlation is fast, but it's not instantaneous. So if you take 50 seconds of data, it might take too long. We had all sorts of issues, not only on the networking side of things, in terms of which protocols you use, but also using different computers. And so this is kind of what we ended up landing on. I think there's a more streamlined implementation, is that this adaptive controller sits on the same computer as the host. That would be great, or even on the acquisition side. And we also had to hack this ECG. We were getting it from an in vivo monitor, not the system itself. So there were lags kind of all over the place. I think we kind of stumbled upon an answer, but I think if you're working on a particular system, where is your ECG and where is your sequence is kind of where I would start, and that might be the two things to piece together.
All right, perfect. Yeah, this is still magical. I think that's amazing that you can do this so fast and make decisions like that. So there's a question from the audience. The question is, are you using the Prime ECG unit from NIH USA?
That's a great question. We were not. We were basically using an in vivo monitor that's MRI compatible. That's outside of we were working on Siemens, so we couldn't at the time get access to the ECG in real time on the Siemens scanner. So we had the in vivo monitor has a plug in the back that we were able to kind of send to a lab view and use to do it that way. I think things like Prime and other units I think would be great as kind of alternatives to what we did, or using the ECG that the scanner itself is already kind of dealing with, and that's a question of pulse sequence programming, I think.
Is there another question from the audience? So I will certainly jump in. If not, okay, I'm going to do this. So you said that your goal is ultimately to do this as like to collect single shot data in real time for patients with arrhythmia. So can you kind of describe, like, what would your goal be? Is it to show like a nice clean image, or to show kind of a real time, or semi-real time acquisition over, the entire cardiac cycle of a like arrhythmia laden beat, or what would you actually like to be able to present?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think part of it we struggle with in terms of kind of what's the focus of the paper, which was, if you imagine acquiring, let's say, a cine, you would hold your breath for 12 seconds or something conventionally, and you gather all the data and you hope it all works well, or the breath hold gets extended, the scan doesn't converge. Here, I think what we could do is you start scanning, and then the images are slowly getting better and better and better because there's more data being added to the buffer. And then you could, when you stop, you now have, let's say, a cine beat of 5 or 6 beats that were found that kind of matched that mode. And you could actually look at the whole movie. So whether you find a certain arrhythmia at the beginning and it's a single shot, kind of typical real-time scan, versus the data at the end would have more multi-shot characteristics, and you kind of are guaranteed to have an image like you would in a golden angle acquisition that's useful, but you also have kind of better control over the uniformity as opposed to just retrospectively sorting the data at the end. So that would be kind of the cine breath hold. I think for interventions, this has slightly different flavor where it allows you to maybe get the best of both worlds and not have to stop and do a multi-shot scan, but to do it in kind of a live setting. And that's what we're working on here now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So in the interest of time, we're going to move to our second paper. So this is another flavor of more interactive scanning. This paper is going to be presented by Dr. Vivek Mutharangu, and the paper is entitled HyperSLICE, HyperBand Optimized Spiral for Low Latency Interactive Cardiac Examination. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mutharangu at this point. Oh, you're muted, I think. I'm so sorry.
After 3 years of
you're good now.
I remember this. Sorry, thanks so much, Nicole, and thanks for the invite. Olivier, who's the first author, has got a great job in industry now, so he won't be presenting today. So I'm just jumping in to present this work. So what's HyperSLICE? So basically what we're interested in here is interactive cardiovascular MR. So that's a combination of real-time image acquisition, which is pretty prevalent, but also on-the-fly reconstruction with interactive scan plane control. So the operator needs to be able to move the scan plane, and that image needs to be visualized almost immediately. So I've just got a quick example for those of you who haven't seen interactive before. This is the interactive that you get on the scanner, and actually this is during a catheterization. And I think this shows all the benefits and the problems of interactive. Yes, you can move the scan plane. This is a screen capture in real time, but the images are rubbish. Okay, low resolution, low spatial resolution, low temporal resolution. It's fine for the sorts of catheterizations we're doing at the moment, but probably going into the future, it's not good enough. So look, lots and lots of cool ways of getting high resolution real-time imaging, particularly with compressed sensing. So we've got lots and lots of compressed sensing algorithms out there with lots of very nice lots of nice real-time reconstructions, but quite long. Even the ones that are fast that are run on GPUs are still seconds, and we need to be able to see an image in tens of milliseconds. And so therein lies the problem. Machine learning is interesting, does speed up the reconstruction, but most of the really powerful machine learning approaches have been unrolled iterative type reconstruction. So they're still taking more than 50 to 100 milliseconds to reconstruct a frame, and that's too long. So as a group, we've always been interested in the post-processing type of reconstruction. So what we would call deep artifact suppression. So the idea here is that we just take the gridded image with all the artifact, push it through a convolutional neural network and get a sort of artifact suppressed image out the other side. So it's very, very quick, maybe not as good, doesn't have data consistency, but it does the job, and it's perfectly synergistic with low latency imaging. So we've done this before. We did it with radial, golden angle radial, much like Francesco showed, with a recurrent UNet, because one of the things with deep artifact suppression is it benefits from temporal redundancies. You're moving the trajectories around throughout time, and that really adds some noise-like characteristics to the artifact. So just once again, just to show you what that looks like. So this is radial and, pretty high resolution. But the big problem is that when you do a big change in the image position, you get this sort of blurring artifact over a few frames as the hidden state is updated. So that didn't quite work. So what HyperSLICE is about is changing two things: the trajectory to spiral and the reconstruction network to fast DVD-Net, which I'm going to describe. The thing with spiral is that you now have more degrees of freedom, because you not only have changing the angle, but you can also change the variable densityness of it. There's lots and lots of parameters that you can change with a spiral. So what we had to do was find the optimum spiral trajectory and simultaneously the optimum deep artifact suppression weights of our fast DVD-Net. And that is what the HyperBand does. And that's where the hyper from HyperSLICE comes from. So we took several hundred Cartesian data sets, raw data sets, as our training data. And what we do is they are unsampled by a factor of 2. So we just do a graph reconstruction. We now have multi-coil, fully sampled K-space data. Our ground truth magnitude data, so our target magnitude data, is just simply Fourier transform and then coil combination with root sum of squares. So that's what we want. And then we can then, essentially this is self-supervised. So we're going to take that ground truth data and we're going to synthetically undersample it with multiple types of non-Cartesian trajectory on each coil and then do root sum of squares. So that gives us our input data. Just talking a little bit about the fast DVD network itself. So this is a really simple network, and it's been demonstrated to be very powerful in video denoising. Essentially, it's just 2 UNets. There's a first set of UNet blocks, and there's a second set of or a second UNet block, and they essentially all have the same structure. So very classical UNet. This is a 2D UNet. And what happens is that we need that temporal redundancy. So what these are is basically, this is the image that we want to reconstruct, and then we take the 4 images that come before that, and we sort of put 3 images into the first block, 3 images into the second block, 3 images into the third block. It's like a sliding window. They go through this block and then through another denoising block, and then we get our deep artifact suppressed image. So it's still a 2D network, but it does benefit from the images that came before it. So what about the hyperband? Because that's really the main bit of this. The hyperband optimization is essentially, it's not really a brute force. It's much cleverer than that, but you can start with a search space of parameters. And the parameters we have are, what is the inner space radius, which has got a specific density? What is the outer space radius, which has a specific density? What is the transition between those? And do we use golden angle or uniform angle? So we're basically in hyperband starting off with a whole bunch of different options in that parameter space, and then we're continuing training the ones that are giving us the best image quality. And that essentially, after several days, gives us the optimum, or a set of optimum trajectories and the associated optimum reconstruction. We then tested all of this both in simulation and prospective. And I think rather than going through the methods, I'm just going to go through straight to the results, because I think that's where all the bang for buck is. So let's look at some of these optimized trajectories, because this was not what we were expecting, and it's quite interesting. So this is just, these all have about the same temporal resolution, about 55 milliseconds. Uniform, and you can see the gridded image is pretty horrific. Loads and loads of aliasing artifact. And then these are all the optimized ones. And what you can see with all of the optimized ones is they're heavily sampled in the middle and they're sparsely sampled out in the outer regions. And so actually our previous deep artifact suppression was really removing aliasing. Actually, these are much less about removing aliasing and doing a super resolution reconstruction. And that's really important, because that's a slightly easier problem to do at low latency. So, and you can't do this with radial. You can only do this with spiral. It's only with spiral that you can really fully sample the center and get quite nice images. Yes, there's a bit of artifact, but much easier images for the UNet or the fast DVD net to reconstruct. And optimized one was the best. So just to show you in simulation, so one of the things that you could see in that first image is it wasn't very nice when you made a big change in the orientation. So here's some ground truth simulation data. We're going from a short axis to a 4-chamber. This is radial with the fast DVD net. Short axis, rubbish, rubbish. You're sort of seeing a 4-chamber. So it's 3 frames before you see a 4-chamber. That might only be 150 milliseconds, but to an interventionist, that's a lifetime. Uniform spiral, short axis when it should be a 4-chamber, short axis when it should be a 4-chamber, something in between. So that's even worse, actually, because you're not actually seeing the right anatomy. Optimized spiral, short axis, 4-chamber, not a perfect 4-chamber, but by the second frame in, we're getting really good image quality. So this shows the power of optimizing your trajectory with a good network architecture. Is if you compare just a simple uniform spiral with an optimized spiral, much better image quality during those transitions. And you can see that, and that's both for fast DVDNet and the original recurrent UNet. But the fast DVDNet is much better. If you look at these SSIMs, you get really quick back up to high image quality. So that's the sort of simulation work, but probably what's most interesting, of course, to everyone is the prospective. So in the prospective, we took 10 patients. We compared just regular Cartesian breath hold imaging, just run-of-the-mill stuff, but of course high quality, with our spiral HyperSLICE, so reconstructed with fast DVDNet, but also reconstructed with Storm, which is a state-of-the-art compressed sensing, and a spiral VARNet, so state-of-the-art, or relatively state-of-the-art, non-Cartesian unrolled ML. So let me just show you some pictures of that, and then I'm going to show you some videos because I think that shows you better. So reference looks great. This is this is Cartesian real time. So the sort of original out of the box, when you get your scanner, that's the real time you get. It's not bad, but it's low temporal resolution and it's a bit blurry. This is just the simple gridded, which already looks okay. Okay, that's the point here. The optimized spiral gridded image looks okay. Storm actually looks quite nice as a single image. VARNet looks nice. HyperSLICE looks nice. But why don't we just look at, just get the actual right image. Okay, so this is actually during catheterization. So here we have the gridded image. Storm, not bad, but, has the usual CS artifacts. A little bit of temporal blurring, a bit of weird spatial stuff going on. VARNet, actually not that dissimilar to Storm, so very similar, not bad, but not perfect. And then HyperSLICE, and it just looks great. We were really impressed with how good it looks compared to what our state-of-the-art reconstructions. Very sharp borders, really nice temporal fidelity. You can see the catheter very nicely, even though it wasn't in training. So one of the other things that we were really interested in looking at here was what will it look like if you do things outside our distribution of training data. So a couple of things that we wanted to, actually this is in the supplemental, so let me show you the video. So there are two things that we're really keen to look at. What happens if you have loads of motion? Because of course our training data is breath hold, it's got no motion in it. So what happens when you have lots of motion? Let me just go to the right video. Okay, here we go. So what we have here is breath hold, free breathing, exercise, and peak exercise. And they're really going for it here at peak exercise. We've got HyperSLICE versus VARNet versus Storm. I'll just go back to the start. So in a breath hold, they all look pretty similar. They're all quite nice. Free breathing, actually, they're all pretty nice. Maybe these are not, Storm is a little bit blurry, but actually, gentle free breathing, not bad. So I think in exercise where you really see things falling apart for compressed sensing, and even maybe less so for the unrolled, but still it's problematic. And that's probably because it's taking much more data in for reconstruction. And then at peak exercise, I think HyperSLICE is still doing well. Remember, this is just a single shot, single frame by frame interactive imaging here. And then lastly, here we've just got different base resolution. So what happens if you change the resolution? Actually, it works pretty well. And I just wanted to show you, this is in action. So this is a screen capture. This is not a reconstruction. All of this is working on the scanner. The sequence is working on the scanner. We have a gadget-on reconstruction, but it's all being piped back into the scanner in real time. And you can see here, during the transitions, I might just go back to that transition. So we're actually monitoring as we pull a catheter back through the patient. You can see, and then when you get these big moves, it almost immediately gets you good image quality. So that's what was quite exciting about this work. It's ready to use on the scanner. The reconstruction time per frame, so the frame time, the acquisition time is 55 milliseconds. The reconstruction time is 33 milliseconds. There's about 19 milliseconds of other stuff going on during communication. So we are reconstructing quicker than acquisition, which is, of course, completely necessary when you're doing low latency real-time visualization. So I think that's my 10 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much for showing us these gorgeous images. So I'm first going to ask the audience if you guys have any questions. Again, you can raise your hand, drop something in the chat, or go ahead and just unmute and shout it out. Okay, in the meantime, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. So as far as I think I understood, you used a Cartesian data set. So you had a whole bunch of Cartesian case-based data.
Yeah.
And then you like sampled that along different spirals to kind of understand, what spirals were working well with your network, and the spiral length. So how long were your readouts for each of the spirals?
Yeah, so let me just go to that.
Yeah, I don't expect you to necessarily have it.
Yeah.
at the top
Can't
of your
remember
head.
off the top of my head. I think the maximum we allowed was 3.8 milliseconds.
Okay,
because
so
it's
pretty
FP.
short.
So yeah, these are short spirals because of 1.5 SSFP. So, but I think the final acquisition was less than 3.8 milliseconds, but we allowed it to go up to 3.8 milliseconds.
Got it. So the question I had about that, Matthias has raising his hand. I'll get to you in just a sec. So you didn't have to worry about like off resonance artifacts or any like fat blurring or anything because the readout was so short?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, we do a lot of spiral imaging, and the way we get around all these problems is to keep them really short. So even when we're doing gradient echo, we try to be less than 10 milliseconds. I think that keeps a lot of these problems away from us.
Got it. Okay, go ahead, Matthias.
Yeah, thank you very much. Fantastic work as usual, Vivek. I have a question which is slightly off topic, but because I have been interested in the trajectory of interventional MRs in a while, and there's so much great work being done, but it's just sometimes it appears so difficult to actually get people to clinically do that. Where do you think are, in a nutshell, the most important hurdles one should take to make it, let's say, used more often, which would make total sense?
Yeah, so so if people are interested in how to do this in a cheap and cheerful way, we're doing a live case at SCMR, so on Friday. So please do come to that. But our whole philosophy is don't buy lots of expensive stuff. Don't buy a $60,000 fiber optic microphone. So we actually do it in a very routine scanner. We don't have anything new. So from almost all of our first 2 years, we purposely used only sequences that you could buy on the scanner, and only kit that you would have in the scanner, except the screen in-house room screen was the only additional bit of kit we bought. And we run it as a clinical service. We do 4 to 5 MR caths in a morning session, without any clever stuff. When we have the clever stuff, then we can do other things. So I think, and I've been in the intervention game for quite a long time, I think we made it look too hard because we had all these XMR suites and we spent loads of money and we said, well, you can do. Actually, what we needed to do is make it look easy. And actually, it doesn't have to be too complicated. As long as you're not trying to do something very complicated like intervention. We're just doing right heart caths. And we truly believe for right heart cath, if you have an MR scanner and an interventionist who will push the catheter, you're good to go. So I think partly it's our fault. I think we made it look difficult.
Thank you very much. It's very good to hear it from your side. Yeah, thank you.
All right, if there are no additional questions from the audience, then we are going to wrap up our CMR Journal Club for today. 2 plugs. So one, we have a journal club. Our next one is on February 7th, I believe, that Matthias will be running. Go ahead, Matthias, if you have something to say about that one.
I just wanted to add the details have to be, but it will be about myocardial infarction. It will be about clinical role of certain prognosticators that are derived from CMR. So there will be 2 papers presented on that. Details to follow.
Awesome. And the second thing I want to say is that we are not affiliated with SCMR in any way, but I think a lot of us will be at the SCMR. And so I think, I speak for myself and Matthias, I hope that, if you're part of this CMR Journal Club and you're at the SCMR, please come say hello, because we love to hear from people who are involved in the Journal Club. So yeah, definitely we hope to see you all there. Anytime you can drop us a line, but this is a special place where we be in person, we can say hi.
Yeah, and if you enjoy the Journal Club, spread the word. More input, and we're also always welcoming ideas and comments on how we can make this even better. Thanks, and bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.